Essentially, this is what must be developed. The art of giving out in love and intelligence what is taken in from vision and the experience of self-transcendence and solidarity with the universe. Das ist es im Wesentlichen, was wir weiterentwickeln müssen. Die Kunst, mit Liebe und Intelligenz das weiterzugeben, was wir in der Vision und in der Erfahrung der Selbsttranszendierung und des Einsseins mit dem Universum aufgenommen haben.
Ayahuasca, farming little script, and give in 50 super seeming. And I'm going to cover a lot of ground, and I'll try to do it with somewhat less detail than I did last week. This was a little too long thing, but I'll try and make it shorter this month. But it's really a big subject. First of all, I want to talk just a little bit about the Amazonian ayahuasca or phenomenon, and then later somewhat about what we call ayahuasca or ayahuasca analog. Also about Pharmacotheon, which is a type of ayahuasca with pure compounds instead of plant extracts, and some of information about the snuffs. And I want to conclude with some speculations about Mesoamerica, and as this pertains to the cultural area that's predominant in the Mexican indigenous culture. Well, you've all heard the term ayahuasca. It's a Quechua word for the liana or vine of the souls or spirit out of the dead. And it's this plant, Banisriostis kanwaki, is focus the vine or liana of the soul, or focus it that here, wait, you're in the micro. No. I think you can hear me in back. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And this is growing on a jacaranda tree. It's Banisteriopsis kanwaki is the I did the blood.
Is that working?
Yeah. Banisteriopsis kanwaki is the scientific name. It's in Malpighiaceae. And we often talk about ayahuasca as a generic thing, but it's really rather a generic name for a complex of potions which only have one thing in common, basically, and that's the presence of the ayahuasca plant itself, which is this one. The vine, the stems of which, especially the lower, thicker stems, are used principally, although active compounds are found in all parts of the plant, and leaves are sometimes added. I think the plug has come loose on the back of this thing. It's on around the back, and that's why it's this bombing. This jiggle the plug or something. Oh, there we go, man. Here you can see the leaf. And this is used all over the Amazon basin. It has escaped over the Andes to coastal areas of Bolivia, Ecuador, and even up a little bit into the Panamanian area where it's now Panama. And in the Amazon, it's basically a cultivar. Nobody can really identify true wild populations of it. And it has grows only within a few hundred meters of sea level and some degrees of the equator. Although these plants are growing at 19 degrees north latitude and 1,350 years in Jalapa, where it does quite well. You can see the flower here, and this is flowering in Miami. Mine are never flowered, but this will give you an idea of this. It's adaptable to some climate areas in the United States, and many people grow it as a sacred plant. And it grows so successful where I am that it just really knocked down in a windstorm a very sizable tree came down from the wake. You can see this is all I lost on Gamada. The part that's used of the stems, that's the base of that plant you're looking at before. And this was planted outdoors in 1992. This one little, piece. And so it grows quite quickly. And I say a little bit more about the preparation of the potion in a moment. I just wanted to show you this image. It's called Ayahuasca Vision by Ivana Prardis, who's here with us. Did your fantastic beaver. In the Amazon, there are many different ways of preparing this. I said it's really the name for a complex of potions that only have in common ayahuasca, but also, before I talk about the potions, sometimes the crushed up stem is even smoke by itself, no additives. And in that case, it is recorded by Soltis to be wrapped in leaves and heliconia or tapanillo. This is a Mexican California, has this one. And the plant is actually smoked. Also, the stems are chewed and in conjunction with snuffs. And I'll say more about tricking getting snuffs. I'll say more about that at the part of the presentation. But actually, this was first studied in the whole business that I will talk about monoamine oxidase inhibition and activity of tryptamines was originally proposed in the context of the snuffs, because ayahuasca, it had alkaloids been found in snuffs, and ayahuasca parts have been found in collections, ethnobotanica collections of snuff plants. And the major alpha-hydroxy are beta carboys, of which the predominant one is harmine, and secondarily harmaline, tetrahydro tertiary harmaline in the axle line stems. As I said, other parts of the plant contain them, and these are generically called beta carboines. We now know them to be enzyme inhibitors, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and I'll say more about that down the line. But in the potions, the principal compounds are harmine and tetrahydroharmine. Harmaline doesn't seem to survive the cooking process. This is harmaline, and this is actually the most active of these from MAO inhibitors. In human beings, especially the stomach, seems to be at least double the activity of harmine, at least in me. And the types of assays with rapid liver cytosol fraction and so forth are those, and shows about the same MAO addition of harmine. Okay, well, when we talk about the potions, I said we have a complex of potions. We've identified somewhat under 100 different plants, which are reported in the literature to be added to these ayahuasca potions. And we have a whole range of preparation of the potions, from in the Colombian Amazon, simply crushing the stems, infusing them in cold water, no additives, drinking the water. That's the basic ayahuasca. That's probably the prototype in the simplest form. And then you have cooked ayahuascas, ranging from cooking for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, which is typical in the Rio Produce area of Peru, also seen in the Rio Napo area of Ecuador. And then you have what's most known to people on the outside, the phenomenon of long cooking and concentration of the potion, which is common around Iquitos, Pucallpa, Carabobo, in the Amazon of Peru. So sometimes more than one additive plant would be used. And so even if we have nearly 100 plants that are added, and we have reports of up to half a dozen being added into any one given brew. And so it's quite a big complex of potential potions, virtually in an infinite number of possibilities. And the additive plants I break down into a few different categories. The first one is the catch-all category, miscellaneous, and because we just don't know the biochemical or ethnomedicinal rationale for the use of many of these plants, simply because they haven't been studied chemically, and also they're not really known the chemical reactor as well. But this serves as a catch-all, and it's probably 2/3 of the plants or fall into that, but we can conjecture that some of them are undiscovered psychotropics, and probably a great many of them, but certainly not all of them. And there are also a second category of additives are the stimulants. And this slide shows the xanthine alkaloids, principally caffeine. At least 2 different caffeine-containing plants are added to ayahuasca. One of which Yoko, or Paullinia Yoko, which contains the caffeine in the bark, being the source of the stimulating drink made from bark shavings. And it's in the same genus as Guarana, Paullinia Cucana, Visorblus. A hind caffeine, and the other one is Vayusa, which is an Ilex. Ilex Vayusa, much used in the Rio Napo and Ecuador. And in both cases, they're added to counteract the soporific effects of the ayahuasca, because it's a sedative, much like the ayahuasca is a much like Dalime, or Mepaliapicacy, site that's prominent, the Dali in rural Kishi. Besides the caffeine-containing plants, coca is added to ayahuasca also, and can be chewed along with it as a covert. And this would more than likely correspond to Eridrosum cocovar itadu, which is adapted to the Amazon, the Cestan de longer. It's known as itadu. And rather than apuricando or sucking on twigs of the leaves are powder, roasted powder, mixed with cecropia and then digested by the spoonful. Here you can see the flower. This is B. coca bar coca, or what's known as Bolivian dough. And sometimes this is unusual, and I had seen this before. Sometimes you get clusters of flowers, and they even had one that produced almost like flower pop clusters, like coca buds or something like that. And I got about 100 fruits off of this. It's about a 20-year-old plant, round raw. And here you can see the berry birds like them very nuts. The seeds are not laterals, very long. To complicates cultivation. These will I've known to my knowledge ever don't be grown in powder. For like the caffeine-containing plants, coca is added to counteract the sulfate effects of potion. And here you can see a typical Bolivian juice by a coca that maps what the leaves of and commerce look like. They're semi-dried in some way. These curing process, then we go, that's how they're carried tradition. Now I'm going to focus on 4 different categories of visionary plants we're at as ayahuasca. And this is what I'm particularly interested in because my interest is ethnopharmacology, discussing psychotropic and the best of visionary, or some would say psychoptic, and some people use other terms. But there are basically 4 categories we can delineate right now of vision plants out of the ayahuasca. Tobacco, this is Nicotiana tobacco, and also Nicotiana rustica. This is probably the most important geographically and numerically ayahuasca coper net of all. And it's basically associated with the shamanic ingestion of vision plants, Pan American, in almost all tobacco is the common elm. And it's a very important one, and not to be overlooked in the pharmacology. But I have not studied that, but nobody has in my knowledge. But we do know that tobacco itself is an MEO inhibitor. Cigarette smokers, ordinary commercial cigarettes, show about 40% MEO inhibition rate. So it may be significant in the pharmacology. We just don't know. Nicotine in the matrix alpha, here you can see the flower. This is an additive wild type plant from my area. And BC Vermont's in the Badland. And just starting seed of this now would be very difficult to eliminate or produce a lot of seed. And it's a hairy party plant. Beautiful, clean agate. This is how it's cured and sold in the Amazon around. This is made of the real knuckle area. But this is like dried tobacco, and it's cured, which are then moistened with a peel of the same material, a concentrated tobacco juice, and then rolled up into was kind of watery and wrapped in leaves and bound in twine. Then they are smoked up with preserved in Jackman use some variable tobacco. You can buy these commercial simulations that you Santa Cruz de la Sierra and Gorilla in the marketplace. Okay, tobacco. The second category of vision plants added by ayahuasca to the same family, Solanaceae and Grundfelsia. And there are 2 different species used by a number of different indigenous groups in various parts of the plant. And we know nothing at all, a sense at all, under ecology of this, much less its interactions with the ayahuasca bellboy. Other than to say that when in 1977 during the Alpha Helix Amazon expedition, certain they did fractionation at another laboratories on the Amazon River, and this is known to contain abundant scopolamine, furan, and it seemed to be psychoactive animal experiment. But my knowledge, no one reported any testing this. But our best conjecture is that this scopolamine is a psychoactive constituent of Grundfelsia. But again, we don't know much about the activity of, and this is a minor factor, not widely distributed, at least in the record of Rehem. The third category of vision plants, also in the Solanaceae, is Shrigmatsia, sometimes called tree ducturids. And this is pretty widespread, and it's also pan-Indian in association with San Pedro or Trichoceres cactus congested. And the Grundfelsias are widespread all over Latin America or South American origin. Pre-contact introductions to Mesoamerica. This is Bergmansia sanguinea and Lepidor. And here you can see it was quite different from the ones you might have seen, and it's vegetatively very different. It's a much smaller, stiffer flower, but very potent. Now in Ecuador has more or less cornered the world market on these alpoids grown from this particular plant. Formerly they were derived in Australia from Buboides species, but I believe we had most of it measured. This is another type of Bergmansia suaveolens. They come in different color varieties. This is the same species, but a recolored variety, and this is really an excellent strain. But it's produces lots of flowers and lots of leaves. They get very big, and that's in my place. That's pretty much in flower all year round. Very rare cases and then flowers and we took close up with the towel. Durable that the run of mainly into an IP is not them. They make caustic chemicals that are psychoactive, and this is known to the South Americans. And this is Brugmansia versicolor, and this is a sort of the mutant form which has multiple corollas. And these plants are important in shamanism not only because of their psychotropic effects, but also because they transform. These two flowers are on the same plant. And they get, or what some people think maybe a deceptive rose is studied in detail, viral infection that causes colic blood. You get duplicate corollas, and then it advances, you get quadruplicate rolls. This is a quad here, and one of these vestigial in their tree there. And then the next step is they lose the morphology entirely. You get this thing that we call panuelo or anther. But everything else, this is the same plant. That's not a okay. So three categories I've enumerated with tobacco, Renfelsia, the Brugmansia, all in the Solanacea. Then you have the category that most of us are more familiar with, and that are the tryptamine-containing plants, of which this one is the most widespread, Psychotria viridis, the Rudiaceae or Compi family. And there is another one that's much less dispersed, which is also from the same family as Ayahuasca, Diploteris caberani. But this is known as Amiruca panta in Quechua, it's known as Chacruna, Chabrona in Brazil. And this is the leaves of this were added to the ayahuasca brews in the Carpathian areas. If you know coffee, you can see what superficial resembles. If you cut open the fruits, there are two coffee bean-like seeds, Psychotria viridis. And this is a fairly good source of DMT, which you see below page here. And it's not as good as other ones that we found, though. And I'll talk more about that later. But basically, what I'm going to focus on now for the rest of my remarks on ayahuasca is the combination of chacruna leaf or Ocoyapeo, Diploteris, and Ben styriatus, and the interactions from a plausible tryptamine on the bicarbonate. And the most important tryptamine involved in these ayahuasca additive plants that have been studied is DMP. But they also contain 5-mecosine, which is sometimes known as omega serotonin, and it's quite a bit more hydrodynamic. But so far as we know, it's a minor constituent, and there's not yet been reported in an ayahuasca group, my knowledge. They don't have much data, only about 17 kosher in numerous. So this is the basic formula here. You have the ayahuasca stem, Bensuatus halapi, and then the leaves of chacruna or Amiruca panta, Psychotria viridis, combined to make the class of what ayahuasca was, what had been adopted is Daine by Panistas and Shalasta by the Udeveristas. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the composition so far. The ayahuasca plant was first studied in Colombia in the first decade of this century, and from it was isolated an album that's called Pedepatina or telepathy, which turned out to be identical to harmony. And it was first mostly shown in this 1923 thesis from Colombia, but it wasn't until 1939 that it was shown to be harmony, which had been isolated almost a century earlier from Begal Harmla, for which it got its name. And just want to show you some literature for future reference about ayahuasca. Some of the most important publications. This one from 1967, U.S. government publication, Ethnopharmacologist Jonathan Ott, has really good information also about Smets, Kava, America Muscario, and other topics. And then also the books of the Colombian Pirago Raikal Dolnaka, Amazonian Cosmos. There are about 10 of these. That's very interesting and very important study, but a lot of extremely good ethnography, and then also pardon? That's not that. Raikal Dolnaka. I can give it to you that. I'll just spell out for you. And the Archicanival Garden and the Flora and Tropica series that is published in 86. This taxonomic monograph Advanced Reoptis from Diplocaris. That's the best source of, I can give you the references I have on the slides, taxonomic information of Ministerial Cystizen. In 1986, in the Medibandituna, which is a Mexican publication, this is from a symposium, I think this is Peter, and all the cases are in ayahuasca, but those in Opaspillion, this is a really good curated source, and you can find this in unused books. Also, books of Luisa Luna, especially the Catalismo, which is in pieces, published from down your Japanese. You're probably more familiar with ayahuasca divisions, with some 50 paintings of Pablo Armaingo illustrating his visionary experience of ayahuasca that correlate epigraphic information on what various plants can be depicted in the types of or cultural activity that they're being shown. And this is a very fruitful approach that these pioneers are right with vulnerable and have been taken to a higher level by living with Inger. There are several modalities of use in ayahuasca in the modern world. I totally put briefly to those, and probably on various ones I focus on. We have the religious on this left side is there are several churches in Brazil that are legally integrated that use a form of ayahuasca, generally a simplified form, Jasprit or Chatruna or Leho Chacono, and ayahuasca. But they also they use some additive as well. And this has not been well studied. I know the UDV was some Saba, you know what they are. And also you have ayahuasca tourism of all kinds, which I'm not much in favor of. And I try to work to make people have access to these things in their home countries so that they won't feel the need to go touristically looking for this kind of experience. You also have psychological use, therapeutic use, and that's, I think, a really solid prospect for the future world. But I don't think particularly the religious use has a great future in the world, and I hope that ayahuasca tourism does not. And I think therapeutic modality is the winner, and also especially the psychonautic, shamanic psychonautic model, individual voyaging and self-acquisition, that seems to me to be the model. There's also use of ayahuasca as a therapy to so-called drug addiction, and I think, but that's a fruitful approach, but not any, especially so you go to other compounds of this kind, like LSD, like it's not a unique thing of ayahuasca. Because there are clinic, two friends of mine in Carapoto, Takiwasa, and they publish a really excellent the Castilian language journal called Capiwasi. And this is another example from openly up that does this sort of thing in Europe. There are a number of people using ayahuasca this grave, and also using other things like in Boga, MDMA, and so forth. I know you today in the summer. And the best books on the Church of these two, Guiado per la Lua by Edward McCrae, who's a Daimista and also an anthropologist in Salvador de Bahia, about the the Daime, the history of Daime, and that this is a non-commercial book from the União do Vegetal, or UDV, about Huasca, that get their history, but they haven't made this commercially available. So. And in my book, Pharmacotheon, this painting is actually from the book I lost the Dentes, by Pablo Amarillo. But this has extensive information, and I lost it even more so in this book, Ayahuasca Analog, which I'm just now releasing in a second edition that's completely updated, and a lot called the New Vedic, appropriated since it's supposed to be in 94. And the pharmacological and chemical side, it was recently resumed by the, summarized by the Chauvin and Tikal. And so that's an excellent source of information. Christian Brechet wrote also on the Encyclopedia of Cyberactive Plants, thus far only available in German, that has extensive information on this cover, and especially the ayahuasca analogs I'm going to talk about in a moment. Trout's notes from the United States, really detailed chemical information. By the way, most of these things can be purchased if they're still in print from the Mind books and Sebastopol ballpoint. But this has really detailed information on ayahuasca and ayahuasca alvo, really details. And then this is an example in the kind of, and this is about Juremos and Chiapas, and he also figures in both of these. And there's another one, trichomy, some higher plants in that same series. Trout notes are anonymous out of Austin Hecker. And also there's the entheogen review, which is now in a new iteration. And they have a summary from past articles called Ayahuasca Analogs and Plant-Based Cryptamines, which is mostly experiential reports and the basement shamanic experimentation of youth-formants. Now we're going to talk about ayahuasca analogs. And what I mean by that is an ayahuasca-like brew made from non-traditional source plants. Now, I said that the beta carbolines, especially carmine, the advanced are MAO inhibitors, meaning they inhibit the enzyme MAO or monoamine oxidase. And among other places, this enzyme exists in our gut and it chews up DMT before it can be absorbed and get to your brain. But if you can inhibit it, this was the theory. It wasn't proven right away. If you can inhibit it, theoretically, DMT to get past it, we could bring the active oil. People taking up a gram of it orally, you know, about that. You wouldn't want to smoke a gram, so you burn your lung out in one vein. But it was found, and I'll just resume this very superficially. We have only 17 analyses of ayahuasca potions, and it was discovered that they contained a range of some 40 to about 440 milligrams total beta carbolines per dose. Now, the dose extension is, of course, a bit vague. And as far as the BMP component, these were they called BMP containing potions, that it was 25 to 35 milligrams per dose over these 7B potions, with an average of 175 or so milligrams of beta carbolines and 30 of BMP. And so, as I mentioned in 1967 in that book, Ethnopharmacologist Search for Psychoactive Drugs, Homestead and Lindgren suggested this mechanism that DMT was rendered active orally in ayahuasca by concomitant inhibition of monoamine oxidase coming from the beta carbolines that were also present in the brew. And this was never put to the test. Everybody accepted it, and as explaining the fact that very low amounts or we had BMP in these potions were as the actor. But no one really put it to the test until the late 80s, and Dennis McKenna at least showed that ayahuasca brews were an MAO inhibitor, and laboratory experiments were effective to that, the actual brews, not the pure alkaloid. And it remained for cybernautic underground to work out a pharmacology of this, and other people have done this, and I report my own way of doing it on Ayahuasca Analog, and I think I was the first one to publish it. But I found in a series I've done something like 50 or 60 experiments of this nature, using what I call pharmawaska, putting the pure compounds in capsules. I found that I started with the lowest amounts. First, I established the oral activity of DMT and found by using large amounts of Syrian Risi extract and putting DMT in and drinking it. And I found that 20 milligrams was acceptable, and 30 milligrams for me represented an oral threshold dose for visionary effects, beginning color patterns, auditory stuff, which is the hallmark to me. And so, and then I used 30 milligrams as the key point. To do this, you always want to be at the threshold, not 10 times over that. Because how do you know, or they either work or want it or not? So then I started with the lowest amount of using pure harmine of beta carbon that's ever been recorded in ayahuasca. It's just 40 milligrams per dose. And I take 40 milligrams, 30 milligrams BMT, and so forth. Well, it took me about 12 experiments to get up to the harmine level that is active. And indeed, the theory held out. And then for me, it took 120 milligrams of harmine, I'm expressing it as pre-base, and 30 milligrams of DMT as pre-base. We now know the carnelian is about twice as potent in this way. And tetrahydroharmine is a great deal weaker than this. In fact, it seems now that tetrahydroharmine shows more of a serotonin reuptake inhibition effect than an MAO inhibitor effect. And so that's an important secondary compound of ayahuasca. And usually the beta carbons are 3 parts harmine to 1 part tetrahydroharmine. And that is an SRI or certain reuptake inhibitor, but a weak one. It may not be significant in the levels, and Yeah. Now, this is important because VMP and these beta carbonates are not uncommon in the botanical world. In fact, we know nearly 90 plants that contain DMT or 5-methoxy-DMT, and there are well over 100 that contain beta carotene, but there are something around 70 that contain known MAO inhibiting beta carotenes. And so it follows that there are many combinations of two plants that could theoretically give this ayahuasca effect by combining them so that you got an MAO inhibitor and a psychoactive tryptamine. The real pioneer in the ayahuasca analog phase is my partner in these seminars, Rob Montgomery, who also launched the Shamanic plant business in 1986, 1987 with this company out of the jungle. And he was launching on to market in the late 80s, the first attempts to nail down these ayahuasca and analog plants, as we're calling Ayahuasca. This company has since fragmented into two. BPC, the Memory Conservation Board, with Rob still runs, and Allies, which is Forming Partner runs in the seed and plant businesses and Allies, and the experts and so forth, and the EPC. Everything that I'm going through now is sliced in ayahuasca analogs, all the extended region. PC was just the first edition, which is now exhausted. Immediately we fixated on Peganum harmless seed, the original source for chemists of these beta carbolines in the 1840s. Harming and Hunling were isolated from the seeds of Peganum harmla, which is known as harmla also. And these are available commercially legally pretty much all around. But in the United States, they manifest like this under the name S-Bond or A-Spun. And they're sold in Middle Eastern grocery miscellaneous type stores. And they're sold like this in spice bags or seasoning bag, the typical label, and you can buy a 4-ounce spice bag for a few dollars. But Shamanic plant deal was also sold. Now, these seeds contain 10 times roughly the alcohol level, beta carbolane level of the ministerios's stem, although, of course, there's considerable variation with strain to strain and so forth. But normally what people do and what we have done to make an ayahuasca analog and what seems to be safe and count for all of the stringing variation is set a dose level of 3 grams as enough to affect MAO inhibition in the stomach. I will talk about this later as easy to skip over that. And then the tryptamine part proved to be the tougher nut. Rob first launched, I think the first one that was actually put out commercially and this was many years before my book came out in 94, was Esmanthus illinoensis, or the Illinois Dundelclaw, which contains DMT and 5-methoxy-glucosamine and other tryptamines in the roots. And this works, that it proved to be fairly low amounts of tryptamines, roughly about what is in psychotria though. And people were also, the shamanic plant dealers began to sell psychotria leaf and Banisteriosis. So people began in late 80s to brew ayahuasca in the United States. And we've looked for a lot of other tryptamine sources. And just want to run through a few of them here that some of you may have experimented with. This is an Australian Acacia and Adenii, which have been reports out of Australia, and that's a place where early activity of this kind went on. Roughly wouldn't say contemporaneous of the U.S. ayahuasca anymore. And I mention that because Australia is also one of the first places where we have any evidence of non-traditional psilocybin mushroom use outside of, the Mexican first thing. And I think from there it spread through surface to Bali and Kainan instead of the Metzkisopodecture. So this is Acacia maydenia. That's from seed in about 3 years I can earn about 5 roots. Good tryptamine. This one unfortunately died on me. This is an Acacia simplicifolio simplex from New Caledonia. Also one of the richer 1 million on 1%. The end is reported in some plant parts. From there on, I will focus on Bismuth, which is Mimosa. Here you see hospice, but it's really Mimosa pendiflora. The same genus or family there's Acacia of the Biminosi, the legumes. And it's best known indigenously Jourdain apecum, because Sunnis the black Jourdain, that's what it's called in the Ozil. And this has become more or less the standard commercial way of making ayahuasca analogs at home. And so people will generally now use pregammon harmless seed for the beta-carotene, and a root bark of this palm, which is Mimosa tenuiflora. This is growing in Mexico. It grows over a vast range, probably the total area that covers is substantially larger than the United States. And it grows maybe as far north as Baja California, because there are people exporting something out of there. They call it jurema, but it's not reported botanically. And its farthest northern reach in the botanical literature, the coast of Oaxaca. And it grows all the way down the coastal Caribbean through the Caatinga of northeast Brazil, and almost to the southern border of Brazil along the Atlantic coast, below Bahia. And this is in Oaxaca, basically. And I am just going to run through these fairly quickly. I had more pictures of it down the line, but it's a very hardy dry tolerant plant. And this is growing in an area where almost nothing else will grow, where they evaporate the ocean water and make sea salt. And the ground is very salty. It rains very seldom, and it's intended to kill them and take up a taproot and regrows from the lateral roots. I don't know if you can see the spiny maker from this picture a little bit. Anyway, it was a very way. It could be that big, but I have better than this down the way, and I'll show you these. But this is Mimosa tenuiflora, best known as Mimosa hospice, Jurema preta, and that's what the commercial root bark looks like. And it's about 1% DMT, but strains as high as 11% have been analyzed. It's not reported in the literature yet. 1% DMT or throughout the nectar in the pool. And so my typical dosage from the Rob will talk about the specific preparation is 3 grams of gallon harmless seed crushed up in a mortar, 10 grams of Jurema beta and root bark, and Rob will went to the actual brewing in there. So this kind of summarizes the dairy. Ayahuasca with, or some people call it Mimohuasca or Jurema-huasca, and now the amount of inflammatory you need for one dose. And remember, both of these are considerably stronger in aldehydes than the Amazon and Prayograx. So even though this is an analog, from a natural products chemical perspective, this is a more desirable situation. They're starting with higher concentrations, you have plant material, and if you're going to have to swallow it, you use less water with strength. And this is important. The stuff is not going to replace CMP Alsaka. Okay, now it happens that this plant, Jurema preta, has a history all of its own, apart from ayahuasca. And this man, Osvaldo Gonçalves de Lima, a Brazilian microbiologist who worked most of his career in Mexico, has written some very important on Mexican book. He went to a place in Pernambuco near the border of Bahia on the Rio São Francisco called Pacaratu, and studied the phenomenon of the potion called Vinho da Jurema, the wine of Jurema, or Jurema wine. Jurema is a Tupi word. Vinho is Portuguese, of course, the wine. Jurema is a Tupi word, and it refers to a kind of a Sashawani, a forest spirit who manifests as a beautiful Indian woman with a jaguar. And there are icons of this, what they sell. And this was once probably a very widespread practice, but from all evidence, it more or less disappeared before 1946. We was studied in its pristine form. And this was the first attempt to study it. But this is called Observations on Vinho da Jurema, utilized by the Tancaramburu Indians at Cacaratu. And in 46, he observed the preparation of the potion, documented it, and it was simply, just like in Pondy with ayahuasca, the crushed root bark infused in cold water, squeezed a little bit, skim the foam, filter it, and drunk in the actual ceremony. No cooking, no add. Now, this is the area looking southward Bahia. And he isolated a compound from this which he called nigerina, or nigerine. And from the empirical formula he gave, we might conjecture that it could have been an impure form in DMT, cross-contaminated with DMT and oxide. But it was never effectively characterized until 1959, when working from material sent by Gonçalves de Lima, chemist at the Pfizer company in Connecticut, isolated DMT in high yield from the roots, about 0.6% isolated from this, and so that was in 1959. But Gonzalez de Lima's report in 1946, were it DMT, would have been the first discovery of DMT as a natural product, or rated as an entheogen before it was specifically characterized and from an Anadenanthera seed pond, and also in the United States. That 59 paper is really important. I think they had the Wallace period there. And well, this is the 46. It's only in Portuguese. Yeah, this one. Because it also represents not only the identification of probable synonym Nigerine DMT, but it also represents the first isolation of 5-methoxy-DMT as a natural product, the Biculum and inkinescence. And furthermore, there was a study of Piptidina or Anadenanthera colubrina with Grumola we'll be talking about associated. So you have three biggies that all of us are talking about now, and there's one 59 paper in JACS, the Criminal and Cancer Society. Well, here you see the thorny nature. This is a potato. This is called espinator also. Here they would say uña de gato, the generic name for any legume the cat swallows its spines. Everyone associates uña de gato with Antaria, which is the Mentaria in the ayahuasca complex in the Rubiaceae. But that's used for a lot of things. So be careful here with things that they call uña de gato. This is one. And this gives you an idea of the kind of ecosystem which it grows. This is ulmio, also in Temnaruco, very common. And there are many of these trees are what they would call jurema. But there's only one Jurema preta. And this is marks the border between El Buco de Rio San Francisco. And this is the area, and this is just loaded with interesting dunes. Now, let me say a few things about what this Jurema means. Beautiful place. Jurema preta refers to specifically Mimosa caneoliflora, Mimosa hospis. But they also recognize other types of Jurema, out of which the most commonly called Jurema branca, or the white Jurema. And there are 11 species in all that are besides Tenuriflora, they're called Jurema. They're mimosas, acacias, Pithisolobian, and vitas. They believe the vitas still along with Guillermanu. And they're all good candidates for tiphometes. But it's called the position. Yes, ethnographically, this practice has more or less disappeared, and at the same time is more widespread than ever. And I'll explain what I mean by that. What Gonzalez de Lima observed, the preparation of this basic potion, this aqueous extract of the Mimosa tenuiflora root bar, has almost disappeared. It's only been reported once by a friend of mine from the Achicum area of Nambuco, not far from Tagaratu. And but in that case, he would get his thesis on this. It is a Brazilian herpetologist. Found that it was not psychoactive in the doses that they gave to him. There was no additive. There was just extract. And there's a thesis studying this. It's now been reported and developed in about a half a dozen places, but it's clearly a degenerated condition, more or less like ayahuasca, but more so degenerate. And they don't even, no one's reported, I should say, an active dose from this. And another friend, Clarice Novaes da Moca, did her thesis on this in New Chiapas in 1986, and Jurema told us. They're hard to do anything. What's in the back? Okay, there you are. Up here you can see the flower, was num-curvies, covered clusters of flower. This flowers and Gabosier are there, but I mean long that you sure. And Clarice studied this ethnobotanically in the ethnobotany of the Caridi Choco, which are the Caridi, especially the one that's associated with Jurema and Justin. And they only made the potion from Mimosa verrucosa, which is one of the Jurema brafans, although they call it Jurema mansa, the king Jurema. And it was not active. And the Jurenero, the curandero from the Cariri told her, well, because you're not an Indian, you want seal. Granted, that kind of thing always made me suspicious. And I think that the potions should speak for themselves, and I don't understand that notion. But indeed, she didn't feel it, nor have these psychoactive terpenes been reported from that plant, despite many affirmations to the contrary in the literature. We haven't found in primary chemical report of that. So Christina was here this week, and I were in Brazil this summer, chasing around trying to establish connections in the various areas where this had been reported, and talking to people who had studied it in depth. And my suspicion is that basically it's such a degenerated tradition that they more or less lost the connection, the dose mutation, something missing. And I decided to put it to the test. This is the Mexican during that. By the way, let me just say parenthetically, here this plant, this Mimosa tenuipora, is called tepescoite, which means senala, tepesquawi, which means ironwood. It's very strong wood. And tepescoite is probably the most famous non-psychoactive here medicinal herb in Mexico. And they just take the stem bark powder and it's put at the vulnerary and a burn tree on woolies. And we don't have any evidence that the Mesoamericans or the Mayans or Mexicanos discovered the psychoactivity of this plant. And I know this literature pretty well, and I have it at home. And I'm pretty clear that they didn't. And there's no hint in any of it if there was something more to this, or a tubing an oral injection of it. So that is also something that's commonly sold in the U.S., and it's another reason why this is a good source of ayahuasca analysts. It's a famous medicinal plant that's not known to be psychoactive from Mexico, and it can be sold under the name tepescoite. So I decided to put this to the test, and had taken various doses. So I'll show you how the Jurema Preta is made. This is 25 grams of Rusark. Again, remember I told you the same strain I will take 10 grams as a basic dose, not so strong today, with the scallion seed. So the stem, the bark, root bark is simply crushed with the stems, like ayahuasca stems are often compared. The same 25 grams. Put it in a bowl that had the disembodied iron in the bottom, and then just plain well water, and it's squeezed a little bit in the hands, which is another common method for producing these sorts of things. And it yields this kind of toju, which is, you can see why it's called Vinho da Jurema, but it's rather like red wine. In fact, it's probably an important byfactor, much up on that. And so I simply drank it to see what the effect will be. And indeed, it is active orally without any additive plants. There's 25 grams, which is theoretically contained about 250 milligrams DMT, something like a non-orally active dose. And this, the analysis of this plant that was done in Brazil by Olmsted and scientists from Paraíba, Raul Pessoa, showed fairly clear, clean DMT spike in there's like beta, yeah.
Or want to have it crystal wrapped where when
Well, you're blood functional. That's probably about several grams. Album on minutes.
Does it lift your customs up?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that being the case, and remember, you knew about DMT and the Tramadol in 1959. Now, in many of Schulte books, this is some more really key literature here, and the botany and chemistry of hallucinogenic plants, gold item, plants of regals. Colin has about the only one that's talked about this. You know very little about it outside of Brazil, but the Brazilian literature, as far as pharmacognosy and ethnobotany is concerned, is not very illuminating, and there are no bioassay records or anything. And so it has commonly been said in this literature, this is the thesis I referred to on the Cariri Chocó, where she did take the Jurema mansa, of course, nothing. Rio Journal, they studied this in Miyachico, and also Marco Fromboni have ingested it from the Mimosa canephora and also reported to be inactive. And so they reported that in this one area where we know that it still survives the use of the Hospilus or Temniflora, that they use large amounts of suco de maracujá with it, which is the juice of the passion fruit, and maracujá. Here we say maracuya. And they speculated, this is a known source of beta-carbolines. What plant is that? Passiflora incarnata. What's the common like name? The passion was passion fruit. But here it's known by the Brazilian name maracujá. And it's commonly prepared and buy on the sidewalks and stuff all over Brazil in the cities and so forth. But he said they were taking large amounts of this juice with it and speculated that there was some kind of a beta-carboline connection, that monoamine oxidase inhibition was being induced by the suco maracujá and to make the DMT in the jardin orally available, get from the brain orally adequate. This is what here what's diet. And the juices are made from the pulp or out in the seeds, and so it's delicious. It's one of my favorites, and it contains principally harmine, which is also called passiflorine, but it also contains harmine and harmine or methyl amounts and many other beta-carbolines. But to my knowledge, no one has ever reported using this as an MAO inhibitor pharmacologically. And I don't know, I said last week that to my knowledge, nobody had shown the alkaloids in the acid juice, but that has in fact been shown. And so it's a feasible theory. So they were looking for a missing ingredient here, and that's entirely cause of it, that there is a missing ingredient. And Joaquim Gonzalez de Lima first studied it, that had been lost, but he did in fact did not take the potion. The real problem, but this trained stunt, and there will be the Shannon Wayne trance. But what does that tell us from a not too much. This is another Brinfelsi again. There's a possible cross connection between ayahuasca and the additive plant issue. The most important one is this business of the Jurema branca, sore of which I think are Chithysolobian species and Undumnosi, and some Chithysolobian species are ayahuasca additive, for instance, and they add triplies to it. We don't know; they haven't been studied. But there was one record from the last 1880s of a Jim Jones type character in a rural part of Brazil. I forget what state it was in, but in this area, who flipped his wig kind of, and he had his flock out in a very remote area, and he prepared a Jordema potion using cachaça or aguardiente, cane alcohol, instead of water, the Jordema, and then he loaded it up with Rumbelsia uniflora, which is called manacá, and is an important medicine in Brazil, and is loaded with scopolamine, and it's quite toxic. But anyway, the people went crazy, and many of them sacrificed themselves and their own children. Many people were killed before the party was broken up. But that Rumbelsius, the fact that Rumbelsius is associated with that report may indicate some vestigial connection to Jordana, to the past before this is added document. I should mention also in this context that this vast area over which this grows, just in Brazil, which is probably 2/3 the size of the United States, the range of this plant. There are not very many indigenous people. All of Brazil only has 150,000, and the most that are in any one state are something like 30,000 in like Picabo, Paraíba, Pernambuco, Bahia. And so, and there's been some of the indigenous groups today aren't really indigenous groups, because it's an area where there's extensive Afro-American culture, some Portuguese, and some indigenous, and many groups band together for political reasons to define themselves as indigenous groups to get protection for their land under federal legislation. I think it was in the 1940s. And it happens that the Achicum, the area where is the only place today where anyone said that they still take Mimosa tenuiforme expat, is one of those areas. And there's some polemic on it, but the consensus is that it's not an indigenous group. They set up that way to get protection under this law, and learned a certain type of ritual. There were actually itinerant dance teachers that went around at this time and showed a certain type of dancing to people that wanted to do this to prove to the government experts that they were indigenous groups, so they would get protection to the land under this law. This is what I mean by it's really a degenerated tradition in this area, and things aren't what they seem. Tobacco is also intimately associated with this. So just like it's the same as in ayahuasca preparation. A few primary reports we had, tobacco is smoked constantly, blown over the potion while it's being prepared, blown over the cup of potion before it's taken, and so forth. And I mentioned tobacco itself is an MAO inhibitor. We don't get into why this is important in nature about a year ago. But 40% MAO inhibition has been shown in tobacco smokers in the United States. Tobacco smoke is known to being very low levels of beta carbon. We don't know if that's significant in this particular context. But tobacco is another implant link, but as I said, that's common to all the shamanic plant traditions. And this is a very good book about the modern situation and the catching boat, the kite, which we have on it. Maybe the Namper webinar. I won't go into the subject now because a lot of it was in connections between a snap complex, and ayahuasca, and that's something Molo there will be there. So, and here's Wu Homestead, where he was in Paraíba in the 83 with the Juremeda who prepared the potion for him, and then it was reanalyzed with modern methods both in Brazil and in Sweden. And this particular strain, which is from Alhandra and Paraíba, which is outside of the range of the plant. And there's a secondary called the Jurema, which is today more important, and it's a type of a syncretic church in which the Jurema is just a symbol, and the drug of choice, alcohol, and there were several good studies, as no one has ever seen like a vision type potion associated with. They're all called Jurema, and they're called Jureneros. And in Alhambra is especially associated with this. There are lots of Jurema trees there. They don't naturally grow. This is a modern post-contact banana. But they found 11% DMT in this strain for which this woman made the Jurema made the potion. And the potion means something just to the 7.5 milligrams of DMT per milliliter. And so it's hard because you don't know the dosage information and so forth, but it makes it something like 15 to 60 times the DMT concentration that has ever been reported in ayahuasca. And so there's been this speculation of an missing ingredient and so forth, but it turned out there is one because it's active just a bit. And I always knew in my heart that would probably be the case because of I just felt that to be the case. The record of the early making of the potion was so clear and well documented from a pharmacognostic perspective, and there was no particular additive, and the contact is such that it seemed like a genuine vintage. So I drank this potion, this extract, made 2 cold water extracts, just squeezing and letting it stand, 25 grams prep for about 15 minutes each time. Filtered through a melodic filter and drank it. And it was indeed just like an ayahuasca manual, only slightly altered pharmacodynamics and no feeling of MAO inhibition. So how can we explain this? This is something we're working on. A colleague of mine, Zay's Calorie in Europe and Finland at the moment. But it does not contain beta carotenoids. There have been a half a dozen different analyses, and no one's ever found beta harborings in it. And there's the possibility that there's some other category, the natural ammonia oxidase inhibitor in the plant. But to me, I know this stuff really well. It doesn't feel like MAO inhibition, and the altering in the pharmacodynamics, which is I won't go into, suggests to me that's the reason, because there is no step of inhibiting monoaminoxidase. But anyway, what we found so far is there are at least 5 different DMT adjuncts or complexes in this extract. And free DMT occurs, but there are bound forms of DMT, which we're working on identifying now. But the conjecture that we're working with is that the bound forms of DMT is a DMT complex to a larger molecule, like Samaquiptan, the pharmaceutical. And it's large enough and there's some kind of a blocking at the active site of the enzyme. They cannot be acted upon by monoaminoxidase, yet it is nonetheless absorbed from the stomach. And then the free DMT would either have to be generated in the process of absorption or in the brain, because I think it would have to is free DMT in the brain. But all of this we can get at first by identifying the adduct. But it seems like through this we can get a handle on some way of rendering these tryptamines orally active without an intake of monoamine oxidation to your rhythm. And this is important because the monoamine oxidase inhibits the effect of the tryptamine, enables it to get into your out of your stomach, into the brain, but in the brain, it's actually is more or less opposed to DMT, and that's why it's much less active orally than bodily routes. Even with correlating blood levels, use has now been done. And in other words, an equivalent blood level of DMT in ayahuasca, this was ayahuasca that was used for human subjects in Manaus, a certain blood level DMT in ayahuasca compared to the same blood level of DMT injected intravenously in ayahuasca, it's perceived as being considerably less potent. So we know it's not an artifact of how much is being absorbed, except that it is in fact weaker this way. Okay, now I want to talk briefly about Pharmawaspah, and then I'll go rapidly with the snuffs. This shows, harmarin and DMT as a Pharmawaspah, chacruna and ayahuasca. And it's been made experimentally with carnine, harmaline, or a couple of other carbolines. And the tryptamines that have been tried so far are DMT, 5-DMT, and and bufogen is not been tried, and DMT 5-methoxy and diethyltryptamine, which is an artificial tryptamine not yet recorded in nature, and then diethyl, so dinepa, extra carbon. But the one that I use in ayahuasca analog is herning, with BB as promethazole. But I'm starting a company in Amsterdam, that's a Scarlet, and we're introducing legal on the pharmacological analog. It was a legal form of ayahuasca, which has 2 different pills, and one of them contains harmaline, which is the most active MAO inhibitor in the beta-carotene series. The human we got his stories are adult and 100 stones, 60 milligram dose. It's a minimal dose for most people who get sufficient MAO inhibition to get the DMT out of their stomachs. And that's what you want. You don't want any more than that. You're looking for the activity of the tryptamines in the brain. I should mention that in the context of Amazonian healing, this is not what you're looking for. They're not looking for the visions. They're looking for the body power that comes to the ayahuasca analogs. They use 10, 20, even 30 times more higher doses of beta carbolines in jungle ayahuasca, in part because of the purga package. It's a very important period, and it's even called Genera de la Purga. But there are reports from various ayahuasca using shamans in Amazonia that say things like the healing power kind tobacco and ayahuasca. The chacruna, or the DMT plant, just gives a little light to ruminate the situation. The Shuar even told the close colleague of mine who speaks Shuar and has spent much time with from studying their use of ayahuasca, which they call napem or napema, that he was told specifically in the context of acting, temporarily as a sort of shaman's apprentice, that the visions were not what it was all about because of the distraction and not to get attention through them. And so they don't, it's not focused around the vision, but something that's in the body. And remember, the shaman's principal duty in this context is healing, not exclusive. So, and 5-methoxy DMT happens to be about 5 times more active than DMT, and it's legal. So, we're going in the next couple of months, and we have prototypes of this here if anyone wants to try it, commercialize this out of Europe. And it can be sold legally, and it will be sold very discreetly through shamanic plant dealers and through the therapeutic community, because we don't wish to attract attention to this, but to make it available to people. And so we sold as 2 different products with no claims made for it at all. Whereas the natural herbal comic 10 milligrams of 5-methoxy DMT. These are legal in the U.S. And a natural herbal relaxant, which is the harmony, and 60 milligram dose. So these will be commercialized within a couple months, and I presume from player. Okay, now I wish to discuss the snuffs, because that's the other piece and another piece yet, and it's Tiffany Housen. Again, this book is a really important source for information on two different kinds of tryptamine-rich snuffs, which I will discuss in turn. And this is where the theory or the ayahuasca effect was first launched in this book, published by the United States government, by the way. No copyright, circumtentative documents, $4. It's the best deal we ever got now, our government, I think. And this book also, by Reichel Dolotok, The Shaman and the Jaguar, is a really good source of information on snuffs and ayahuasca in Colombia, being the one with the Cana. Also, this book by Desmet, Ritual Enemas and Snuffs of the Americas, in the Americas, 1986, out of print, unfortunately. And Manolo Cordes' book, The Iconography of Salvadoran Snuff Trays, from the Ethnological Studies Series of the Groningen Ethnographic Museum. And Manolo will be talking about the greater detail about this. And I'm going to talk briefly about two different kinds of tryptamine-containing snuffs. The first one, this is the Huaycapijo of Brazil, Venezuela, sometimes more commonly known as young mammal. And they prepare both kinds of snuffs that I'm going to talk about. But the one that they use most, and it grows in their area, is what is generically known as Edbena or Edbena Cavniaquana, has various names. And it's administered like this through a blowgun-like apparatus, the end of which is packed with and it's shot into both nostrils. This is also from our government's publication, and this illustrates the dramatic effects and then this plant, this is prepared from that reddish bark up there, and see the red extract. And that's a bark of the Marola tree, Myristicaceae, the nutmeg plant. And there are about a dozen or 13 of these that have been shown to contain psychoactive tryptamines, and half a dozen maybe. They're recorded in ethnographic reports as being used in snuff preparations. And in this case, the principal compound is 5-methoxy-DMT. There are low levels of DMT, which are probably not particularly significant in the effect of the snuff. But what they do is they strip the bark from the trees fresh, and then a red resin is exuded, which you see in that file on the piece of bark. And so the resin is then dried and powdered, and that's the snuff powder. And it's fairly high amounts of 5-methoxy-DMT have been found in this, sometimes above 10%. And I go back to a slide of ayahuasca because I want to reiterate what I said before, that ayahuasca is also associated with these snuff plants, especially the Darola. And there are a couple collections where the ayahuasca stand with Darola bark, it has source plants, and then this nut sample, and harmine and harmaline, which are more or less, there's fairly not so broadly distributed as some of the other radiocarbons, are more or less signature alpha-logs for bands 3 alpha in South America, and they have also been found in high amounts in the snuffs. For the snuffs, and this is something that I'm studying right now, the nasal pharmacology of tryptamines and these snuffs, and I'm intending to model the snuffs with 5-methoxy-DMT, also the bifodine, which I'll discuss in a minute, as I did with the tryptamines in ayahuasca. So it's also related to the ayahuasca phenomena. There are other plants that are added to snuffs. This one was called Justicia pectoralis in the Ecothaceae, and it's very aromatic at the days fumers. But there is a report of tryptamines, DMT, from this plant, but which hasn't been confirmed. And there is a reason to suspect a hostile contamination from Darolas that are being collected at the same time that needs to be studied further. That the Justicia is made in snuff by Waipa South. It is called Mashahardin. So this is possibly adding DMT to the 5-methoxy-DMT, which is in the Varroa bark, and which all brings low levels of DMT in some species, compounding and other tryptamines. So in that sense, here you see the ingredients of the fermalost, which are also kind of the ingredients of Varroa snuff, probably, in the overall phenomenon, the beta-parvalate and 5-methoxy-DMT. Well, that's, and you can see the flower was a Justicia pectoralis and Yakan Basie. And this is a good bet for another tryptamine plant and an acid snuff. And it's on the right, that's the dried powdered leaf. And our old friend, Yeti. Okay, I want to discuss another type of snuff, and then I will have a few rapid speculations on the Mesoamerican situation, and then I'll stop. Anadenanthera is another leguminous genus, like Manosa. And Manolo is going to be talking pharmacologically and experientially more about this. I won't say too much about it, and it's something that I haven't yet gotten from school for cognodoxy at the moment. But the study of this phenomenon, which is Northern, South American, Caribbean, South Andean, and across Northern Argentina, Southern Brazil, is best summarized in this book, The Genus Anadenanthera of Amerindian Cultures. These Anadenanthera is the ones classified as Pipcadenias, but Anadenanthera is the currently accepted taxonomy by Siri Fernrice Altschull and now from York Canterbury Garden, and this book again contains significant information about this class. This is Salta in northern Argentina, and this illustrates one of these important species, which is Anadenanthera colubrina var. Cedi, and the snuff prepared from the seeds of this plant is Genericum Cedi. And this is the city of Salta, which indicates the Precordillera de los Andes, and this is the capital of the state of Salta in northern Argentina, on the border with Bolivia. And this is the plant in the foreground, and this is a mountain called San Bernardo in the center of town, which you can go up on a teleferic, and the whole mountain pretty much covered with this, as are most of the mountains for good radius around the city. It's not an uncommon thing at all. And this is right at the tall freak state. If we sampled this particular freak, we could find it again. Here you can see the flower, but quite a bit different, the flower, but not so much the lead structure from the most Anadenanthera colubrina var. Cedi. And I'll leave to Manolo to say more about the ethnography of the snuff, because I know he goes into it, and he will talk a lot about these artifacts. But it's the seeds of this Anadenanthera colubrina var. Cedi that are used to prepare the snuff. And one of these trees, they're not large trees, would have some hundreds of pods on it in a good year, and a good pod would contain a dozen of these seeds, and properly prepared, a dose might be only one seed, or two, or fewer. And so this is not like mushroom hunting. You've just got whole mountains covered. You can go up in the cable car, chewing coca, drinking mate, and then you just scope them out down below, and you don't have to get muddy and stuff. It's really kind of like gentlemanly working condition. And it's very common, and these are now being commercialized in the shamanic plant market, and I know there will soon be some really good snuff products made from this seed. And that was a replica of this particular snuff tree, and Manola's going to talk about these. This is probably Anadenanthera wood. This is from northern Chile, from San Pedro Pacana. But I'll just show you some examples, and I'll leave it to Manola to talk about this. They're really beautiful artifacts. And these are snuff tablets. They're probably Anadenanthera snuff, almost certainly. And we have a strong evidence for it. That one's in northern Argentina, in Pucará. So what we have observed in bioassays and so forth, and in fieldwork, the seeds are simply toasted slightly, make a little crispy crust, not really finely powdered, and smoked with tobacco. And they're more active, apparently, according to the shaman, smoke than snuff. But even today, when you use primarily smoking, they snuff small amounts of it, kind of to keep faith with the tradition, which, as you will find out from Manolo, has an uninterrupted history of something like 4 millennia in this area, and is one of the best documented and long-lasting into modern times evidence we have on this sort of thing. This is another very good book by Henry Bassin, The Use of Some Specific Kinds of South American Indian Snuff and Related Paraphernalia, same series as Manolo's book. Which you see here came out about 10 years later. And this is a painting that from Dona Torres, which is from San Pedro de Atacama, looking at the Paso de Jaime in Argentina. But Manolo will put this in context, but this is all related to Anadenanthera colubrina var. Cedi. And again, Manolo will go into this, but the main, I'll just say chemically speaking, we found in these seeds from about a half a dozen samples from northern Argentina, from around Salta and from around Taptaga, from about 2.5 or 3% up to about 14% bufotenine, and almost no other alpha-ors. trace amounts of some other trigger, no DMT, no 5-methoxy-DMT, although both have been isolated from pods of another species of Anantha. And we don't know anything really about the pharmacology of Rufotein. That's next up for me, except for some unethical experiments that were done on prisoners in the Ohio State Penitentiary in 1956 and on mental patients in New York State in 1959, which was injected intravenously in fairly high doses into people, and it showed, in one case, they said it turned their colors, their faces the color of an eggplant. And in the other study, it said it turned their faces the color of a plum. So it gives you an idea of the dramatic cardiovascular effects of injecting this stuff in your bloodstream. But some of those kind of effects are shown from smoking or intranasal application, because remember, bufotenine is 5-hydroxy-DMT. Serotonin is 5-hydroxy-T. DMT, but just without the 2-methyl groups. And bufotenine of all these compounds is the closest one to serotonin. And it's an isomer of psilocin. Psilocin is 4-hydroxy-DMT and is active orally. Bufotenine is 5-hydroxy-DMT, and we don't know if it's active orally, cranking, but I'm going to find out. And so it's called serotonin 5-hydroxytryptamine because sero, blood, tonin, pressure, tone, because there are lots of serotonin receptors in the bloodstream and the vascular system, and also on platelets. It's very important in the circulatory system, so it's not a good idea to inject bufotenine or serotonin IV, and I certainly wouldn't do that. And I use that painting on the cover of another book. That's why I show it, and it's on the wall of my office now. Okay. Before finishing up with Anadenanthera, again, Manolo will give you a lot more detail. There was another species. There are actually 2 species with 2 varieties of each. And along the savannas of the Caribbean coast of North America, and in more recent times in the Caribbean itself, there was a large, widespread use of a snuff made from this plant, Anadenanthera peregrina var. Peregrina, also known as pitidina, sometimes in literature, also prepared from the seeds, which also contain bufotenine in lower levels, but not a lot of other stuff. And this is best known by the name yopo. The Waika call it hisioma. They also use it, but they have to go to the savannah to get it and trade for it, but they prefer it to their own indigenous epena snuff, the 5-methoxy-DMT one, because it's more potent, probably also easier to keep long term and where they live. And you can see the seeds look very much like the Anadenanthera colubrina seeds. And we have fairly sketchy data on the preparation, but this is a collection that Richard Spruce made in the Orinoco of a mortar and pestle and a carrying implement and a double snuff tube. And this is unfortunately more or less disappeared. It still survives. It's sort of like the Jordama thing in a few areas, but it's imperative that we get more information about this on an ethnographic level. In the Caribbean, among the Taino people, which have disappeared completely, but were the first indigenous peoples to be studied by Europeans, by Tané, who was left on La Española by Colón, by Columbus, and he went back and left him there to study this, and he learned Taino. There it was used with this kind of implement, which is called a semi, and it was a table. It's like a table height thing. There was smooth hardwood platform on the top, and it was snuffed on top of that, probably through a snuff tube. There wasn't a snuff kit with it, and these were undoubtedly in some kind of temple. And there's always associated erect phallus with this, and I think the bufotenine is going to prove to be the herbal super Viagra. That's my feeling. It's some Viagra that will really work. Okay, I'm going to drop the Anadenanthera because Manolo has a lot to say about that, and I don't want this to run too late. I want to talk a little bit about Mesoamerica, what's now Mexico. And some speculations about this. Now, it's always struck me as strange that in the Mesoamerican area, like centered around where Mexico City is now, going mostly through northern Mexico down about to the Mayan area, that's what we call Mesoamerica. We know some dozen or so chemical pharmacological categories of vision glands. And there were representatives of about 8 of those just in the Pharmacotheon of the Nahua speakers in Mexico. So they were real experts on this. And we know that they made snuffs. We know that they made enema, but we don't have any solid evidence connecting a known surviving practice or historical record connecting a known tryptamine plant with that. Short-acting tryptamines, of course, psilocin to tryptamine, but that's orally active. I'm referring to these ones where some kind of snuffing or MAO inhibition, DMT, 5-methoxy-DMT-bufobi. There are sources for them here, but we don't have any solid evidence that they were used or that there are names that suggest that, or, and there's a lot of history of this stuff here. And so in Mesoamerica, the entheogen complex centered around a type of an ayahuasca potion, which is an all-purpose vehicle for administering inebriating plants as well as ordinary medicines. And here there were 2. One of them was the cacahuacu potion, or cacao, not sweetened, no milk, water, cacao, sometimes cornmeal and other plants, to which were added various psychoactive plants and also ordinary medicaments. And the other one was opli, which you see in this pot on the top, or today called pulque, which is a word of obscure etymology. And that's the fermented sap of the agave plant, which I'll show you here, and I'll back up. This is agave salmiana. Many different species are used to make this, and I'll say a few words about that in a minute. Now, this pot up here is called the Tochtecomacl, and could somebody focus on a little bit? The ocli potion is always like white and foamy. It foams by itself, and if you go to a pulteria today, you can see this. It's only drunk fresh, doesn't keep. And what you see on the top of that are flowers, and that indicates psychoactive additives iconographically to the potion. Xochitl nahuatl is means roughly entheogen. It means flower, but metaphorically in terms like Xochitl, which means literally flower mushroom. It means entheogenic mushroom. And here you see stylistically depicted on a throne the agave plant. And this woman is Mayawe, who's an historical personage that was subsequently deified. And the rabbit is the sign of inebriation in Mesoamerica. And the reason for that is during the 2-century migration of the Nahua-speaking Mexicas, which anthropologists call Aztecs, which is a made-up word, is all historically recorded. They were Chichimecas, they came from the north, and then eventually settled in what is now the Valley of Mexico. But along the way, over a couple of centuries, in probably around Hidalgo, nobody really knows for sure, they observed rabbits going up to the base of the stems of the agave. I mentioned this the other day, hollowing them out, and so forth. This was the woman that made that observation. And then the rabbits would come back a couple of days later and drink the fermented sap. So they started doing this, and they discovered this potion through the rabbit. So the rabbit symbolizes this for them. And the Yacamestli, this nose ring that she has, represents the moon, which is also associated with the rabbit. And they always have the rabbit in them, not the man anymore. And these are signs of inebriation. In the Maya area, the equivalent of this is the Chacmol, which is the god of the Opti-type potion, and had a pole on his stomach and was filled with this. And this is you've probably seen in flower. That's the same plant. When I got back in 2 months in Europe, that thing had grown, in that time. They only flower once, and then they expire. And there are many species used. Many of you are familiar with mezcal or tequila, which is a type of mezcal. And mezcal is the generic name for distillates made from these fermentations of the aguamiel, or the sap of the agave. This is agave marginata var americana. And there's one in particular, tequila is made especially from one species in particular called agave tequiense. But a number of them are used to make these brews, these ocli or pulque brews. Now, here you can see the rabbit coming out of the Tochtecomacl and the foam running all over the flowers, representing the entheogenic additives, and he's underscoring the point by holding the flowers in his hand. And this thing with the spear and the flag penetrating the thing is still obscure to me, and I don't know if anyone's ever come up with any halfway rational explanation of that. But in this panel, you see another Oakley potion that also contains cacao, because cacao is brown foam, and you can never confuse the two. Cacao is brown foam and Oakley is white foam, and it also has rubber in it. That's what the ball represents, because they added the sap of the rubber tree with these kind of potions. And this is really, it's very obvious what's going on. There's tasting the potion and who's giving the high sign. It's ready. Let's go for it. And this gives you an idea of the iconography associated with it. And this one seems to be loaded up with these florid hallucinogens, and specifically mushrooms, which those little dots represent, and the dot on there. And so my conjecture, which is not published, is that Oakley was parallel to cacao in a different ecosystem. The Aztec-type Nahuatl speakers imported cacao from around this area, from actually on the Guatemalan border, but it does not grow in Mesoamerica per se. But they did use the potions, and so this was their analog port. And I think the same situation prevails. The same inebriants we use in both, according to the type of purpose that is involved. Now, there's another goddess called Glasolteor, who's also associated with the agave, but also with inebriation and the moon. She has the yacamestre, but she has her mouth is always black because this hurts. She's the one who eats filth, and the Nahuatl speakers deified this, and especially the sopilote, the buzzard, the carrion eating animals, and so forth. Here you can see how they depict the sun and the moon together, and there you see they're sitting around a pot and drinking the potion. Again, the white foam and the flowers. And now here you can see clearly the cacao potion with the brown foam, and then this white foam Oakley potion, and this is a funeral pyre, and these are Mixtec codices by Lo, from Oaxaca, pre-Columbian. And this woman, what the experts say, is stirring or frothing the potion. This is utter nonsense, because it doesn't need frothing. It makes froth all its own. It's cacao that is froth, and it's froth with a stick that you twirl between your hands, imparting a rotary motion to the head. And the original prototype of this is a small poem called Tepejilote here, which they take a piece of stem that long with a root bundle sticking out about that. They cut off the rest of the roots, and that's the way the origin of these frothing sticks. But they have to be straight, or if it cavitates, it'll slop the thing around. And these, in this context, they're always depicted as crooked or curved. And so iconographically here, they're emphasizing the point that what she's adding there with the stick is that curved stick there on top of the potion. And we now know what that is. And this is the possible connection that the material, it's this plant, which is to this day called palo de pulque, or the pulque stick. And its name is Ocpapli, which means the pulque drug in Nahuatl, or pulque medicine. And it's Acacia angustissima. And Acacia angustissima has only been reported in countercultural literature to contain active tryptamines. It's very common in North America and in the United States in particular. This I use some that I'm growing in at my place in Jalapa. And it's the root again, like in Jordema, that is added to these potions. And this was known from the very first contact time. And the first of the Mesoamerican inebriants to be prohibited by the Spaniard was this plant. And this happened in 1539. There was a royal decree from Toledo saying that they could not cultivate this plant for fortifying this beverage called pulque. Already the word pulque had come into existence. And it was, nobody's tried this yet. This is up next for me as far as the bioassays go. And you can see some pickable leguminous plant. Now, okay, so this Ocpapil needs to be studied. It's like Acacia angustissima more carefully, chemically speaking, we're doing that. And also we need to bioassay this. This may be another situation where there's tryptamines in some bound form like Jordema that are orally active and don't need an MAO inhibitor as is found in ayahuasca. Now, this again shows Mayala, and here you see the yacamestre, this half moon nose ring. And notice the potion down here. That's a cacao. That's very, no one disputes that that's a cacao fruit on top of it. And there you see the stick again. And moreover, she has 2 bundles of the sticks in her hand. And there's all kinds of stuff about these sticks. And nobody's ever picked up on this connection because they don't fixate on the inebriants at all. And this is a pike being smoked over here with some entheogen in the smoke. That clearly shows, and we saw another potion that shows the cacao and ochli together. And so I think they're one and the same pharmacologically and symbolically, but they're just associated with different festivals and deities. That the same role, like ayahuasca, as an all-purpose vehicle for administering ordinary and extraordinary medicines. And here you can see this is the Xochiquetzal with clearly an entheogenic cacao potion with a brown foam. And and I don't have a slide of it, so I'll get one. There's another codex called the Vindo Bonensis, which I have a facsimile of. And in 2 consecutive panels, the same scene with most of the same people are depicted. In one scene, you may have seen drawings or vignettes from this. There's a mushroom seance, and they're all holding pairs of mushrooms in their hands, and it's all these can be read. This is not a lost language. They're mnemonic pictograms to aid storytellers, and that iconographically they're not so obscure. And in these side-by-side panels, facing the one with the mushrooms, there's the same scene more or less repeated with agave, and you see the same thing with the stick. And 2 of the people are doing the same thing with putting the stick into the potion in the same ritual context. And so I'm really pretty sure about this parallelism. And but we just need the bioassay and chemical information. Now, what were the inebriants added? Well, surely mushrooms. This is philosophy sur lessons held by Gordon Moss in the 1950s here in Oaxaca. Also, this plant, which is called Paxihuitl in Nahuatl, the seed of which is called Ololiuqui, contains lysergamides. Also, this was the most generally widespread shamanic inebriant in Mesoamerica at the time of the conquest, the most mentioned in the colonial literature and also in the Inquisition archives. Although today people accord it a secondary role, this was primary for the highland Mesoamericans compared to the mushroom and the peyote, Turbina corymbosa. And it's called coaxihuitl, which means the snake plant, or it's also called Coatl the green snake, and the seed is Ololiuqui, the little round thing. Is the the same as Rabia? Yes. And Rivea is another name, but the currently accepted taxonomy is Turbina corymbosa. And possibly this one in the Bombacesi, Ferraridea funebris, which is also associated to this day in Oaxaca with cacao potions, and is one that I'm reintroducing to my area because it's extinct in the wild in Mexico, and that's part of where I live. And more than likely, Salvia divinorum, which was probably in general use throughout Mesoamerica, and today only survives, so far as we know, in the Mazatecs here, where it does not seem to be traditional pre-Panta, in my opinion. And here you can see it in flower. This is also growing in my place, which is only 150 kilometers north of Wildland, about the same ecosystem. And aqueous infusions of this, rub the leaves in water, which is a highland Mesoamerican technique, are to this day made in the Mazatec Sierra. And it's a technique known for other plants, such as this one, Digitas, which is another lost inebrium. This is Digitas erecta, the common ornamental marigold, or the flower of the dead here, associated with the Dia de los Difuntos. This is another lost entheogen. It was certainly an entheogen, and we don't really know, but it's still used by the Miche, who also use this one, Digitas lucida, and the Huichol also use this one. So these Digitas barely survive as inebriants here. The Huichol mix it with Pedacor. Digitas, Tagetes, lucida, composita. I don't have a picture of it in flower. And I think this is one of the last ones in the land, but I just wanted to show you, this is really an interesting, this is Xochipilli, of the famous statue. And Xochipilli is widely regarded to be the lord of the inebriants, of the dance, of all the shamanic arts. But you see here a fairly good cross section. It's sort of an iconographic association of this deity, such a deity with the entheogens. You have the Oakley potion there with the pulque stick and the rubber. We don't know what the rubber connection is, but that's something that can certainly be studied. You have the rabbit over here. You have the mushroom glyphs along the border. And you have the flower coming right out of his mouth. And you have this lizard coming out of this penis. That's the very symbol of the Oloyuki. The Queshpai is another name for it, the lizard drug. And so that's very clearly associated with it also. And then I'm not sure what role exactly was ascribed to the bird head, but it must have an inebriating significance in this context. And I should mention that one of the Mesoamerican lost entheogens, I know of about a dozen of them, is a bird called Oconeñatu. And Oconeñatu, the flesh of this bird was clearly a vision drug. And we don't know what bird that is now, but that's something that remains to be looked into. But recently in New Guinea, some birds of the genus, I think, Pitoi, were found that contain analogs of the batracher toxins in their skin and feathers in very low levels. And these are found in higher levels in some species of Denver-baited frogs, which is known generically as poison dart frog, but only a couple species have ever been shown to be used in poison darts, and they are also visionary inebriants in their own way. But it's another topic. And I'll end on that note, and if anyone has strength for questions, I'll be happy to eat some.
Each of our regapper. Like, can you plan to have a right in that one? Pictures of tours of it out.
I mean, they sell the what is called the mesquite, but it's stem bark, and the stem bark has been analyzed. It's returned to being DMT, but in very low levels, so into a tenth of a percent. And so I wouldn't recommend using that because it's stem bark. It's not root bark.
Got a better must be nice. It's like, and you will give a decision. Better is not what pop master.
Well, that's news to me because I export it from Maha. And Zach, you're really rotten there once they introduced this to the market as an ayahuasca standalone raw 30 years ago. And now it's become the leading source. And it's either being used by, Dinista over Europe. The ayahuasca analogs, they can't get enough jungle law stuff on the south and there. We're one at a time, what? Maybe there's the Vegas of that's here. Well, we exported out of here, yeah, all done. So it could be sets. Oh yeah. The Glorious don't know anything about it. I lost it analogs, they probably pitch. They don't know.
What's part of the amino oxidase? Is that present in the stomach? That's why the carbamine or the harmony is good there.
Yeah.
Sauce pores in the brain.
Yes, because in the brain it's in the neurodenese, and it's involved in intracellular metabolism. It's not a synaptic enzyme, or I mean that's a cellular.
Well, is that roughly that's the thing it's your brain's blood-brain barrier?
He definitely not. Well, something though, and I don't know that for a fact, but it is psychoactive. Valium like cardiacs if the GABA-A receptor-sites or fluoride channel or benzodiazepines find in the endogenous ligands, of which are one of them the beta carotene, so beta carotene's binding that site. But no, if you take 60 milligrams with tourmaline by itself, you feel up and stink in fact in about 45 minutes, some belling like the mask for an hour. And so definitely it does, it's also absorbed. But there it's kind of working against it as I'm seeing it. But like taking Valium acid or that. And in fact, experimentally, it's been shown really clearly, and also it's so epidemiologically, that monoamine oxidase inhibitor was not beta carotene, the ones that use medicinally inhibit dramatically the effects of DMT and LS. But we have reason to believe in sketchy information from bioassays that they enhance the effects of NF, like ecstasy, and that's, yeah. people bandy around the word potentiation and say potentiation, the synergy is not potentiation, because orally, according to blood titers, DMT is much less active than it is injected smoke, whatever.
He said that there was the use of people would chew on the coca plant or use the coca plant before using ayahuasca.
Yeah,
But I'm not understanding. I mean, are you not supposed to use any kind of veterinary kind or a coca plant when you're using an inhibitor?
well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, all this literature about MAO inhibitors comes from therapeutic use of them in Western medicine. And the first one was a tuberculosis remedy called icoronizid that in the 50s was shown to produce euphoria in some subjects, and that's what led to this line of therapy of monoamine oxidase inhibition for psychiatric therapy, or whatever they call it. And in fact, because of the connection between tyramine, which is phenethylamine in foods, the dramatic reactions you get, there are all these warnings about beta carbolines and ayahuasca and tyramine and phenethylamines, but it's just there's no experiential evidence that I've heard for it. And I've combined all of these things and cocaine. I haven't tried amphetamines per se, but it synergizes beautifully with ayahuasca. It's part of the ayahuasca complex. And the phenethylamines that have been tried with ayahuasca or mescaline, I mean, in pharmahuasca, that I know of, mescaline, TMA2, and ecstasy. And really no untoward effects have been reported. And asked Sasha Shulden, I don't think he would agree with me, but there's no reason to put a warning. And let me explain no-nos. What's that?
I heard that the MDMA and mescaline were the biggest no-nos when you're using.
No, I'd say, and it's just the opposite. You can probably get by in half the dose of both of those by combining it with beta carbones. But the reason for this warning situation is that people have extrapolated. They know about the ayahuasca diet and so forth, and then they know about the dietary board you're taking the MAO inhibitors. But remember, the ayahuasca diet is no different, really, than the mushroom diet and the salvia divinorum diet. It's a spiritual cleansing diet, and it has nothing to do with any particular interaction between things in food and the ayahuasca, but rather purifying the body before taking the ayahuasca, and that's another subject, which I wouldn't comment on because I wouldn't, be able to. So now, in the case of the medicinal MAO inhibitors, now there are many others, of which you probably heard of moclobemide, which is a reversible inhibitor. But for many years, when all this literature was generated, the only ones available were irreversible inhibitors, which bind irreversibly to MAO. And again, the effect that's being sought there is in the nerve terminal in that brain to affect the metabolism of not in the gut. Although these things work in the gut, and I'd made pharmahuasca from isocarboxazide, which is an isoxazole and the inhibitor. It works fine. It's more potent than the beta carbones. And I know for a fact from other reports that moclobemide, which is a reversible inhibitor, also works in pharmahuasca, but somewhat higher doses than the beta carbolines. But the beta carbolines are short-acting reversible inhibitors that are obviously absorbed from the stomach really quickly because you can feel the effect in about 45 minutes and probably cleared from the stomach completely by a couple of hours. And so it doesn't really follow to compare these two. So I just have done it experimentally, and in the course of my ayahuasca and analog experiments and pharmahuasca experiments, even during the effects, eating all the no foods and so on and so forth, and I've used extensive amounts and coca and cocaine both in this context to see the particular synergy. And there is a synergy. There is a definite synergy between the stimulants, both the probably it would be the same with amphetamine, but I don't know. Remember, they add capman also to these brews, another stimulant, and coca, and so it's works great.
But like you said, you talked before that every body is different. That what works for you could be what's not a no-no for you could be a very big no-no for me.
Yeah, but it's good as it, so I should still, of course, use caution.
No, absolutely. Definitely. But I'm just saying that there's no reason to make this connection. It's just that because of the fact that there was diet associated with ayahuasca. But some of the foods that they can take are ones that are not, are so good at medicinal NAO inhibitors. And then this fact of, using these more toxic compounds, really, to achieve a very high level of MAO inhibition in the brain. And we're just talking about transient MAO inhibition in the gut for 1 hour. And that's pretty much what you get. So you beta carbonates, so you minimal, some brain effect, because it's transient also. But I generally, as a good rule of thumb, I don't ever take these things or in my stomach indications and feel good. That's the fast over day at least before taking. And I generally don't want to eat until substantially after the effect. But once the psychoactive effect dissipates, there's not going to be any inhibition in the gut, basically. And very little in the brain. Anybody else ever heard? Yeah.
You mentioned the Botswana.
Mokodama.
Yeah.
Have you used that with the Deus Visos like a Rola Scosacilla? I haven't personal. No, I haven't person, but I met an Australian man in Amsterdam who's done extensive experimentation with that, and he gave me the detailed notes.